Most people assume the best product wins, the best idea spreads, the most qualified person gets promoted. And if you've ever watched something obviously inferior take over a market or seen a mediocre idea go viral while a brilliant one disappears, you already know that's not how any of this actually works. There's a pattern underneath all of it. One pattern that governs how products spread, how ideas travel, how panics start, how movements grow, and how power shifts inside organizations. It's called the Law of Diffusion. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. You'll start noticing it in your industry, in your office, in the news, and in your own decisions as a consumer. And by the end of this video, you'll have 10 concrete ways to use it to your advantage. But here's the thing I want you to hold on to from the start. There's one way people get this completely backwards. One mistake that costs entrepreneurs markets, costs executives influence, and costs investors fortunes. And I'm going to save that for the end because it's the most important part of this whole conversation. Let's start with what diffusion actually is. Diffusion of innovations is a theory that seeks to explain how, why, and at what rate new ideas and technology spread. But the formal theory is only a small slice of something much bigger. Diffusion as a phenomenon is ancient. It's what happens when a drop of ink hits water. It's what happens when a virus enters a population. It's what happens when a rumor starts in one corner of a room and reaches every corner before anyone knows how. The formal study of this in the human world was really crystallized by a sociologist named Everett Rogers. In 1962, Rogers, a professor of rural sociology at Ohio State University, published his seminal work, Diffusion of Innovations. It became one of the most widely cited works in all of the social sciences. And what Rogers found was that diffusion is the process by which an innovation is communicated through certain channels over time among the members of a social system. That definition sounds academic, but what it really means is this: nothing spreads all at once. Every idea, every product, every behavior moves through a population in stages, through a specific sequence of people, and it follows a predictable curve. The adoption of a new product, service, or idea is not an overnight phenomenon. It does not happen simultaneously across all people in a social system. The social system has 5 adopter segments that fit a normal distribution, moving from left to right over time in order of adoption: innovators, early adopters, early majority, late majority, and laggards. And the percentages matter. Innovators represent the first 2.5% of the group to adopt an innovation, followed by 13.5% as early adopters, 34% as the early majority. The late majority is another 34%, and laggards make up the final 16%. So when you look at any new idea, you're always looking at a wave, a slow build, then a rapid surge, then a plateau. And the key insight, the one that changes how you think about everything, is that for most members of a social system, the innovation decision depends heavily on the innovation decisions of the other members of the system. People are not making independent choices. They're watching each other. And once enough people move, the spread follows an S-shaped curve. And after about 10 to 25% of system members adopt an innovation, there is relatively rapid adoption by the remaining members. That's the tipping point, and it doesn't happen by accident. Now, here's where it gets interesting because diffusion didn't start with Rogers. It didn't start with marketing or technology. Nature invented it first, and it's been running the same playbook for billions of years. Think about how oxygen spread through Earth's early atmosphere. Cyanobacteria, tiny, single-celled organisms, started producing oxygen as a byproduct. At first, nothing changed. The oxygen was absorbed, but it kept building, slowly, at the margins. Then it hit a threshold, and the entire composition of Earth's atmosphere transformed. That's diffusion: a small source, a slow build, a threshold, and then a cascade that changes everything. Think about how forests recover after a wildfire. It's not random. Pioneer species move in first. They stabilize the soil, create conditions for the next wave of plants, which create conditions for the next wave after that. Every stage enables the next. The forest doesn't return all at once. It diffuses back in, layer by layer, through a sequence of adopters, if you want to call them that. And then there's disease. Epidemiologists have known for over a century that infections don't spread uniformly through a population. They spread through networks. A virus needs a host, and it needs that host to be connected to other potential hosts. Isolated people don't catch it. Connected people do. And the most connected people in any network, the superspreaders, drive the majority of transmission. Sound familiar? Because the same dynamic runs through every market, every social movement, and every viral idea you've ever seen. Which brings us to the idea that ideas themselves behave like viruses. The biologist Richard Dawkins coined the word meme in 1976, not to describe internet jokes, but to describe a unit of cultural information that replicates and spreads from mind to mind, the same way a gene spreads through a population. And when you look at how ideas actually travel, the parallel is striking. Religion is one of the oldest and most successful examples of idea diffusion in human history. Christianity started with 12 people. Islam began with one man in a cave. Buddhism spread outward from a single individual sitting under a tree. In every case, the idea moved through early adopters, people who were unusually connected, unusually credible, and unusually motivated to spread the idea further. And once it crossed a threshold, it became self-sustaining. The early adopters did the heavy lifting. The masses followed because the masses saw the masses following. Political movements work the same way. Every major political shift in history started in a small community, a pamphlet, a meeting, a speech, in front of a few hundred people. The American Revolution wasn't a sudden popular uprising. It was an idea that diffused through colonial society over decades, gaining credibility as more respected voices endorsed it, until it reached the tipping point and became unstoppable. Culture works the same way. Every music genre you can name, jazz, rock, hip-hop, EDM, started in a small, specific community. It was niche before it was mainstream. It was weird before it was cool. And the people who found it early weren't just consumers. They were carriers. They spread it to their networks, and those networks spread it further. And eventually it was everywhere, and everyone forgot there was ever a time when it wasn't. This is why the future almost always begins in small communities. Not in the mainstream, not in the center, always at the edges. Now, here's where this gets directly relevant to business, and specifically to why the best product so often loses. VHS versus Betamax is the classic case. On paper, Betamax was superior, sharper picture quality, more compact design, and better build consistency. Yet, by the mid-1980s, VHS had decisively won the format war. How? The answer lies not in engineering, but in distribution, marketing, licensing strategy, and consumer behavior. JVC courted Hollywood with open arms, ensuring that VHS became the preferred format for movie releases. The film industry, thrilled by the prospect of a more consumer-friendly recording format, backed VHS, cementing its dominance in the burgeoning home entertainment market. By licensing its technology to other manufacturers, Matsushita achieved greater market penetration and accelerated the establishment of VHS as the dominant standard. And then the feedback loop kicked in. It became a winner-take-all market due to positive feedback loops. The more people who owned VHS players, the more likely video rental stores were to stock VHS, which led to more people wanting to own VHS. Betamax was better. VHS spread better. And spreading better is the only thing that matters. This is the core lesson of diffusion in business. The product that wins isn't always the best product. It's the product that moves through the right networks in the right sequence, with the right early adopters carrying it forward. Innovations that have high relative advantage, compatibility, trialability, observability, and low complexity are likely to succeed. Notice that best isn't on that list. Observability is. Trialability is. How easy it is to try, share, and see others using it. That's what drives diffusion. And early adopters are the linchpin of all of it. They're not just the first customers. They're the bridge between the innovators and the mass market. For a technology to catch on, it needs the innovators and early adopters to evangelize it to others. They're the ones who take the risk, validate the idea, and give the late majority permission to follow. Ignore them, and you never cross the chasm. Win them, and you're halfway to everywhere. Now, let's take this into a place most people don't think to apply it: the office. Organizational politics are almost never about formal authority. They're about informal networks, and informal networks follow diffusion patterns. Think about how a new initiative actually gets adopted inside a company. The CEO announces it. Then nothing happens for a while. Then a few people start actually using it, not because they were told to, but because they're curious or because they see an advantage. Those are your innovators. Then a few more follow because they trust the innovators. Those are your early adopters. And here's the thing: those early adopters usually aren't the most senior people in the room. They're the most connected. The person who has lunch with people across 3 different departments, the manager who everyone asks for advice even though they're not the highest ranking person, the analyst whose opinion the VP actually listens to. These people are the nodes in the network where ideas either gain momentum or stall out. If you want a new idea to spread inside an organization, you don't start with the CEO. You start with the connectors. You find the people who are trusted across multiple groups, and you get them on board first. Once they move, the rest of the organization reads the signal and follows. The formal announcement is just noise. The early adopter endorsement is the actual catalyst. The same dynamic plays out in markets, and nowhere more dramatically than in financial markets. Stock market booms and crashes are, at their core, narrative diffusion events. A story starts, usually with a small group of sophisticated investors or analysts. The story is that a particular asset is undervalued, or that a new technology is going to change everything, or that a particular sector is about to collapse. At first, only a few people believe it. Then more people hear it. Then they see others acting on it. Then the story becomes self-reinforcing because the price movement created by the early believers becomes evidence that the story is true, which draws in the next wave of believers. Much has been made of the profound effect of the tipping point, the point at which a trend catches fire, spreading exponentially through the population. The idea suggests that, for good or bad, change can be promoted rather easily in a social system through a domino effect. In markets, that domino effect is what creates bubbles. The narrative spreads faster than the underlying reality can support. And then, when reality reasserts itself, the narrative collapses, and the diffusion runs in reverse. Panic spreads through the same networks that optimism spread through, just faster, because fear moves faster than greed. The dot-com bubble, the 2008 housing crisis, the crypto boom and bust cycles. Every single one of these followed the diffusion curve. A compelling story, a small group of early believers, a tipping point, a mass adoption phase, and then a reckoning when the late majority, the ones who always show up last, found themselves holding the bag. If you understand diffusion, you can see these patterns forming. You can notice when a narrative is in its early adopter phase versus its late majority phase. And you can make very different decisions based on where you are in that curve, which brings us to the most vivid real-time example of diffusion we've ever had the chance to watch: artificial intelligence. In February 2023, ChatGPT made headlines for purportedly being the fastest-growing consumer app in history. It reached 100 million users within 2 months, years faster than both Instagram and Netflix. And the growth hasn't slowed. To put this in perspective, we can compare the pace of generative AI adoption to the pace of computer and internet adoption relative to the release of the first mass-market product for each technology. August 2025 is roughly 3 years after the release of ChatGPT. The current generative AI adoption rate of 54.6% exceeds the 19.7% adoption rate of the personal computer in 1984. 3 years after the IBM PC, and the Internet's 30.1% adoption rate in 1998, 3 years after it was opened to commercial traffic. Let that sink in. AI diffusion has been faster than for almost all technologies in history. We are watching the law of diffusion operate at a speed we have never seen before. And if you look at where we are on the curve right now. We are somewhere in the early majority phase, past the tipping point, moving fast, but with the late majority and laggards still to come. The current user base is more than triple the 116 million users recorded just 5 years ago. And yet, McKinsey research suggests that almost all companies are investing in AI, but only 1% believe they're at maturity. The adoption is real and accelerating. The mastery is still years away, which means the competitive window for people who understand this technology early is still wide open, but it's closing. The people and companies who are winning right now with AI are not the ones who waited for consensus. They're the early adopters who moved when it felt risky, built expertise when nobody was asking for it, and are now the connectors between the technology and the late majority who are just now realizing they need to catch up. This is diffusion in action, in real time, in your industry, right now. Now, before I give you the 10 practical ways to use all of this, I want to come back to something I mentioned at the start: the mistake that costs entrepreneurs markets, costs executives influence, and costs investors fortunes. Here it is. Most people try to reach everyone at once. They launch to the mass market. They pitch to the whole company. They try to go viral from day one. And it almost never works because the mass market doesn't move until the early adopters move first. You cannot skip the sequence. The S-curve is not optional. The only way to reach the masses is to win the early adopters first. And the only way to win the early adopters is to find them, speak directly to them, and give them something worth spreading. The source of every diffusion event is always small, always specific, always a little obscure. The future always begins in a room that most people aren't in yet. So let's talk about how to be in that room. 10 practical ways to use the law of diffusion every day. 1. Map your early adopters before you launch anything. Whether it's a product, a campaign, a policy, or an idea. Identify the 2.5% who will try anything new and the 13.5% who will follow quickly if the innovators endorse it. These are your first targets, not the mass market, not the average customer. The edge cases who love new things and have credibility with the people around them. 2. Design for observability. One of the key factors Rogers identified is how visible the adoption of an idea is to others. If people can see that their peers are using something, diffusion accelerates. If the adoption is invisible, it stalls. So ask yourself, how do people know that others are using this? Can you build the social signal into the product itself? Slack spread through organizations partly because every message you got from a colleague was itself an advertisement for Slack. 3. Lower the barrier to trial. Innovations with high trialability are likely to succeed. The easier it is to try something with low risk, the faster it spreads. Freemium models, free trials, samples, demos, these aren't just marketing tactics. They're diffusion accelerators. If someone has to commit before they can experience the value, you've broken the diffusion chain. 4. Find the connectors in your network. In any organization or community, there are people whose opinion travels further than others. They're not always the loudest or the most senior. They're the most trusted and the most connected. Identify them. Get them on board early. Their endorsement does more than any announcement. 5. Watch the edges of your industry for the next big thing. Remember, the future always begins in small communities. The ideas that will dominate your industry in 5 years are probably already alive in a niche community right now. Make a habit of looking at what the weirdest, most obsessive people in adjacent spaces are talking about. They're probably your early adopters of tomorrow. 6. In investing, track where you are on the narrative curve. When you hear a story about an asset or a sector, ask yourself, is this in the innovator phase, the early adopter phase, or the late majority phase? If you're hearing about it from mainstream media and your uncle is asking about it at Thanksgiving, you're probably in the late majority. That's not when you want to be getting in. 7. Use social proof strategically. For most members of a social system, the innovation decision depends heavily on the innovation decisions of the other members of the system. This is why testimonials, case studies, and visible user counts work so well. People are not making decisions in isolation. They're looking for evidence that people like them have already moved. Give them that evidence, and you accelerate diffusion. 8. Understand that speed matters more than perfection at the start. Betamax was technically better. It lost. The product that spreads wins, not the product that's perfect. Get something into the hands of early adopters quickly. Their feedback will improve it faster than any internal development cycle, and their adoption will start the diffusion clock. 9. Build for the chasm. There's a gap between early adopters and the early majority. Jeffrey Moore famously called it the chasm, and most products die there. The early majority is more risk-averse, more pragmatic, and less interested in being first. They want proof that it works for people like them. Your job is to create that proof before you try to cross into mass market territory. 10. Become a source, not just a receiver. Every diffusion event has a source. Someone wrote the pamphlet, someone played the first show, someone made the first investment, someone sent the first email. The people who shape where ideas go are the people who originate and amplify them, not the ones who wait to see which way the wind is blowing. Position yourself, your company, or your brand as a source of ideas in your space, and you get to shape the direction of diffusion rather than just react to it. Here's where we've arrived. Diffusion isn't just a marketing concept. It's a governing principle of how complex systems change. Biological systems, social systems, financial systems, organizational systems. The same S-curve that describes how oxygen spread through Earth's atmosphere describes how ChatGPT spread through the global workforce. The same dynamics that determined whether VHS or Betamax won are playing out right now in AI, in energy, in biotech, and in every market you operate in. The people who understand this don't just watch trends, they see them forming before their trends. They know which phase they're in, which people to target first, and how to design for spread rather than just for quality. They know that the best idea doesn't automatically win, but the best positioned idea, seeded into the right network at the right time, almost always does. You came into this video thinking diffusion was something marketers use to explain product adoption curves. You're leaving it knowing it's the underlying grammar of how change happens in nature, in culture, in business, in markets, and in the room you walk into tomorrow morning. If this kind of thinking is useful to you, there's a related video on how network effects compound over time that I think you'll want to watch next. I'll link it right here. And if you want more frameworks like this one, subscribe, because this is exactly the kind of thing we dig into on this channel. Drop a comment below and tell me, which one of these 10 applications is most relevant to what you're working on right now? I read everything, and the conversation in the comments is usually as good as the video. Now go be the source.